experience. And I'm also working on a big data project, so it also, I'm connected to it from that perspective.
Okay. Is there anything that you're very excited about in this upcoming school year?
Well, that was it, you know, the big data project that I'm working on, yeah. Sorry,
Gotcha.
I didn't make that clear.
All right. All right. Someone else like to introduce themselves?
Sarah, this is Chris Mazzio, Education Northwest. I just popped on. I'm on the phone right now. I'll eventually be on video as well.
Okay. And is there anything that you're excited about coming up with your early warning system work?
I am excited to hear what people say on the call and see where this group is going to move. I'm very excited, and I'm happy to join everybody today.
All right. Thank you, Chris.
I can go. This is David Roth. I'm also on the phone. I'm from Aspire Public Schools, which is a K-12 charter management organization.
Okay. Thank you, David. Do you have anything that you're excited about with your early warning system work this year?
We are just kind of still rolling out. So we're rolling out some new tools to just provide schools with kind of like multiple measures of student health, and so we're excited to start kind of seeing how these different measures fit together and how we can coordinate supports for students.
Great. Thanks, David. Somebody else want to introduce themselves?
Well, hey, this is Joanna Fox from the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins. I'm just excited to be with you and to hear all the good things you're doing and to try and put all this into a national framework, which is, you know, the ultimate goal for this project. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Joanna. Next.
This is Emily McGinnis from San Jose Unified School District. This year I'm excited to start thinking about how to take early warning systems and push them into applications that teachers look at and use daily to ensure that they act upon what they're seeing.
Okay. Thank you. Next person.
Hi, good morning. This is Julia Estrada, and I am in Phoenix, Arizona. I was with Valley of the Sun United Way and working with a national compact with United Way Systems. I'm now in the consulting world and really just looking forward to hearing more about the continued momentum of this work nationally and see how I can potentially still stay engaged and continue supporting the data systems, the wraparound support services, and the project around early warning systems and the goals as a whole.
All right, great. Next. I know I saw Jared. Jared, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Jared Knowles. I'm formerly at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction and designed the early warning system for the state of Wisconsin. And now I'm an independent consultant for a company called Civilytics Consulting that does a lot of early warning system development work. So I'm really excited to be part of this group and to talk about early warning systems with everyone. One thing I'm really excited about this year is working on methodologies for doing early warning systems when a school system or client doesn't have outcome data available. So that's kind of one of the new things that I've been working on.
Hi, is something?
Okay. If everybody could mute themselves real quick. Okay. Excellent. So Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Hi. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Hi. My name is Stacy Kehoe, and I'm a senior advisor at Education Northwest, and I just joined the organization. And I just met with Chris and Sarah about my role in this project, and I'm really excited to support the work of the community here. So it's nice to meet everyone.
Thank you, Stacy. Francis? Okay. Hey, is anybody else? So I have, is there anybody else? Elaine?
Hi, this is Elaine. I'm calling from New Mexico.
Okay. And which organization are you with?
Public Education Department, College and Career Readiness Bureau.
Great. And do you have anything that you're excited about this year?
All kinds of things that I'm excited about this year. We've been working with Johns Hopkins on our early warning system implementation for the last several years, and it's really started to catch some momentum. And one thing I'm particularly excited about that this group will want to know about is that we've been negotiating with PowerSchool, and we have an add-in that we have gotten installed in about a dozen districts, and we're on track to have all of our PowerSchool districts have an early warning system add-in probably in about 18 months.
Wow. That is exciting.
Yeah. I'm sorry I'm late. I didn't get to hear everyone else's excitements.
That's all right. So is there anybody else on the line that hasn't introduced themselves?
Francis Dumas Hines from Evansville Vanderbilt School Corporation.
Okay. And do you have anything that you're excited about this year, Francis?
Wow. Can you give me a second on that one? I'm having some technical difficulties over here, and I'm still trying to iron them out.
Gotcha, no problem. All right. Well, so we'll go ahead and start at this point then with the rest of, the rest of the presentation. I'm glad everybody could make it today. Just as a reminder, some of the goals that we're working towards together this year are going to be getting to know each other a little bit better, reflecting on the framing questions that we all were introduced to in May, sharing lessons that we've learned in the field, building the field a little bit more, proposing solutions, formulating actions, and determining next steps. Some tips for working together virtually that we've all discussed in the past 2 meetings that we've had together is to make sure and give your name and organization when you speak. If you forget the organization, it's probably okay, but if you could give your name at least so we all know who's talking. Also, you can use the chat function to ask questions if somebody else is speaking or you want to jot down an idea real quick, so feel free to use that function. Mute function is off right now, but if you aren't talking, it might be helpful to have your line muted just so that the background noise doesn't interrupt somebody else. We'd love for you to turn on your video if you do have that option so that we can see each other's faces and kind of get to know each other that way. Please do remember that we're also recording the session and that feel free to interact with each other. Really quickly, the chat function is at the top of your screen on the right-hand side. And you'll need to pick who you want to see the message. So you could have everybody see the message, or if you want to specifically talk to one person and ask them a specific question, you can have it go to them too. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and go to our tiny URL. So if you want to pull this up on your own screen, that would be great. I'm going to leave this up here just for a second. This link does have all of our documents that people have shared. And we do have quite a few examples that people have shared. So what I'd like to do today is kind of go through some of those examples, get everybody's opinions about what's working with it, what's not, what's missing. And so without any more introduction, we'll go ahead and go to that. All right, so there are quite a few examples on here. I've put some of them up here, like the FHI 360 example, the Education Northwest example right here, and I also put in the Johns Hopkins University some of their slides that they've shared with their diplomas now. And so there's a bunch of other ones on here too, though, that I would love to have whoever has uploaded these to kind of describe the example that they've provided. So the first one is this at-risk flags. Does anybody on the line, did they post this one? Okay, so how about the high school readiness example? Okay, so somebody said that the tinyURL, let's see. Can everybody get to the tinyURL? Let me try something real quick. Okay. All right, so let's try this over here real quick. If you put in the tinyURL, that should take you to this screen right here, and then if we go into data system and report examples, that's where you'll find all the other examples. All right. We have high school readiness. There's also one from, I think, this one, the early warning system in PowerSchool. Did anybody upload this one?
The PowerSchool stuff is from me, Elaine, in New Mexico. And the Makeup as well. The one that says nm-Makeup and the one that says nm-PowerSchool. Those are from me.
Okay. Would you like to talk through kind of, we'll pull up this first one, the nm-Makeup EWIS tools.
Yeah, so what happened is that I had contacted first eScholar about some kind of a data system that would be plug and play, and they gave me a really exorbitant bid and that I couldn't afford. And so then not to mention that there were all kinds of problems because we don't have a single state system and this and that. So anyway, somebody suggested to me, why not look at the different student information system providers directly? And so we have two large players in our state, PowerSchool by number of districts and Synergy by number of students. Synergy is in our two largest districts, but not in any of the small districts. PowerSchool is in most of the small districts. We have a total of 12 SIS in our state. So I called PowerSchool and just kind of outlined what I was looking for, and my sales reps happened to know that the district of Macomb had already built something like this for their own personal use. And so PowerSchool negotiated with them to get access to what they had built. PowerSchool modified it and made it more uniform for our state. And and then as I mentioned when we first kicked off, we have in the past year rolled it out to about a dozen districts. And we look to roll it out to about 50 more over the next 18 months. Okay. So what this is, this Macomb one is the user manual that Macomb created for their district, and that we have provided to our districts as kind of a starting template that they can create for their own district use. And then the other is a PowerPoint presentation that that just kind of gives some of the overviews of kind of at a higher level of what the PowerSchool plugin looks like and what it does.
And have you been able to gather any feedback from the districts that are using this?
Districts have only had it installed in best case, maybe the last 2 months of school. So they're not, I would not say that I have anybody that's actively used it, but the schools that are installing it are schools that have been doing their own data out of PowerSchool for the last several years. And so they're very excited to have this this ready-made tool instead of what most of our schools have been doing is running reports out of PowerSchool, importing them into Excel, running macros in Excel to add color and graphs and that kind of thing. And so to have that on the fly every day in PowerSchool is a real benefit.
Okay. Have you heard that they so far that is there anything that they're missing when they're looking through this or working with their teams?
Not so far.
Okay. Is there anyone else on the
so far has been on points for attendance. Our state has kind of, as a state, we have a lot of attendance problems, and so they didn't really like the 90% threshold for attendance. This does allow the districts to change it, but we've already had some pretty robust conversations about why they might not want to do that.
Has anybody else on the line used their state student information system or their district student information system to create an early warning system report?
This is David Roth from Aspire Public Schools. We also use PowerSchool, and so we have not. I think this is a really interesting use because I think a lot of systems are built outside kind of like the regular day-to-day tools, and so I think it becomes this extra step to get into them. And so this is really interesting. I'd be curious if we were interested in looking at the plugin. Is that available for other school districts, or like how would that is it possible to share?
PowerSchool, of course, is looking to monetize it. It's a little. It upsets me just a little bit that Macomb gave it to PowerSchool, and now PowerSchool wants to sell it. But that being said, we're negotiating somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 an install. So I think that that it would be something that you would talk to your PowerSchool rep about, and I can certainly help connect your rep to my rep.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I do know in Montana, which Eric Meredith is usually one of the participants in this group, but he's not on today. But I do know in Montana that PowerSchool is one of their student information systems, and what they've done is they've actually created their own unique system for the state, but he's had to cooperate a lot with PowerSchool and some of the other larger providers of student information systems in the state. Any other thoughts on PowerSchool about, it sounds like what I'm hearing is that, you know, speaking from a district perspective, we can't have these early warning systems be so cost prohibitive that, well, that's cost prohibitive, but also that we want to be able to do something that's easy for the districts and something that they already have plugged in. Is that kind of what I'm getting? Is there any other thoughts that you have about using something like your local student information system?
Hey, Sarah, this is Joyce Romano. I was just wondering, and just, again, I'm not K-12, so all this is very new to me, but when I was reviewing some of the examples on this site, it made me wonder whether what we're doing, are we thinking about what level of data display are we planning for, or maybe it's all of the above, but, you know, the examples we saw were obviously at the individual student level, is that what we're mostly interested in, or you could imagine at the class level, at the school level, the, you know, kind of the level of, you know, elementary, middle, district, state, United States. I wasn't sure what our project, you know, what we were aiming at.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we had talked about was having displays that are ready for educators, which would be both at the student level and the school level, but also what would we have for parents? Is that appropriate for students? Is that appropriate? And then also for the community, what level of information should we be sharing with the community as well? So I think as we think through all of these, that we should kind of keep all of those different audiences in mind as we move forward. So definitely a lot of those examples that people have posted have been at the individual student level. I know that Montana has a couple that are at the school level, and I think this one that we posted from Education Northwest, it also has a school view on it as well, which is not showing up here. I think I'd have to actually open this up. See what happens. Are there any other thoughts about audiences, or actually, you know, with the Power School one, is that just for your educators then, or are they creating reports also for parents, students, in the community, or is that even possible?
I don't know that they've gotten that far yet. Honestly, I mean, we're still earlier in the stream. I can tell you that in the 3 years that we've been really actively pushing the early warning system, I would say that generally speaking, the SAT teams are only interfacing with students and parents on a one-on-one when, you know, on an as-needed basis, at least in our state, and not seeing a lot of community outreach, data-driven presentations thus far.
Okay.
Hey, Sarah, can I jump in? This is Joanna. Yes. And wanted to share with you a little bit about what's being talked about in the other two work groups, which are indicators and response systems. And first, we're working towards, we haven't gotten there yet, towards kind of the criteria or developing a set of them that govern our work, basically. Second, I would say that there is the perspective, and I think it's relevant, it's very relevant to this last conversation, that we look at what we're doing through two different lenses. The first lens is student level, setting level, and system level. And setting could be classroom, it could be school, or grade level. And that comes from the work that was done through CRIS, which is how readiness indicators system. Stanford, Chicago, and Annenberg and Brown in Rhode Island, and we played some part in that. But that's one very useful way to look at what are you doing, who's it benefiting, who's it being shared with. And then the second is the standard approach that we've taken for years of what kind of intervention you want to take. And so that is, how is the evidence, data, however we want to call it, actionable and at what level. And sometimes that's for the whole school, and that might be, you know, climate surveys that say, whoops, this school is not perceived as a safe and healthy place for students, by students, or teachers. One is the intermediate level, where one notices the patterns that say, my goodness, we got a challenge with our math classes here, or maybe it's social studies. Or sometimes, and I came across something the other day, and I know from my work in Alabama that, my goodness, PE, which is not something you think about, but it is required for graduation. People don't like to dress out, so they're sailing it in very large quantities. You know, right. Totally unexpected in the school reform movement. And then at
right.
the management level. So there are different lenses, and as you all talk as a work group, I think it's important to keep those in mind. And what are the lessons that you're learning?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good way of breaking it down, actually, because I know, on the screen right now what I have is a report that we put together for one of the districts that we've worked with, and we have it broken down by where they can just select what grade level they want to look at so that they can see differences in the grade level, but I know that there's other schools that also break it down by, you know, socioeconomic status or ethnicity, different things that, with the idea behind it not to single out different groups, but to be able to provide culturally responsive interventions and things like that. So that kind of bleeds over also into the other groups' conversations. Are there any other thoughts about those different levels and kind of thinking about this type of a report, what would be missing still? Okay. Well, let's go on to another example. How about that? Jerry, did you put up anything from Wisconsin?
Yes, I put up the action guide, which is a user guide for the Wisconsin early warning system.
Okay. And do you want to give us some feedback of kind of about what you guys were doing there?
Yeah, it's a little old, but I think, you know, like everyone who does this work, you know, you're operating within the limitations, and I think we don't have a school report, although I really wanted to have one at the time. I don't think there's a school report yet. So it's all about student reports for educators. And the guide is intentionally, if you look through it, you're like, well, where do I actually see the display? And we put it pretty far down because the idea was to put a lot of context about how to interpret the information and how to, in general, do at-risk and student intervention management, because what we found is that a lot of districts that wanted to do this hadn't had a system in place before, or they weren't doing anything intervention management-wise with data. And so because of that, we wanted to kind of put that down, not put the data at the front, but put the process at the front, and then put the data display down there. And like everyone else who does this work, our data display was limited by the technology that we had already adopted, you know, and that we had already used. So I wouldn't list this as my ideal system, but it was the best we could do within the constraints of what we had, the route we had already gone and the development time we had. But the focus was to give a high-level indicator, and that schools could sort by, and then to give just some basic idea of why that high-level indicator exists. So we just reported high, medium, and low on 4 categories. You'll see assessments, attendance, discipline, and mobility. Those were the categories that we had statewide data for that were really, really predictive or really influential in our prediction, and we could easily sort students into those categories. And so that is where the focus is, and the idea is to allow a school or a teacher, but at the time that we rolled this out, it was just schools, to sort all their students by their overall risk category, and then to look within that overall risk category at the subcategories of why students were at risk. So I think, you know, that's kind of was the ideal. There was a hope that we would go toward grouping students into categories of risk, so thinking being more prescriptive and saying, okay, these are your students who are at risk because of behavior data. These are your students who are at risk because they are at risk in everything. And these are your students who are at risk just because of their academics, so that schools could more quickly go through their intervention management meetings and be organized in sort of around the idea of interventions instead of around individual students, because in many of our schools with a lot of students flagged, they're big schools, so it takes a lot of time to, go through 300 flagged students, and so the idea was, well, maybe we could break them up a little bit more for the school. So that's kind of the overview of what I shared.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know that that's something that I hear from districts quite a bit is, well, how do we prioritize the students? Does everyone else agree that we should have some kind of function in these systems to be able to sort students by either category of risk or most at risk or something like that? What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like that's an important feature?
This is Elaine again. My experience has been that when you move away from lists and you move towards some kind of visual, that can really make a difference. I don't know that I've got the technological base to do it, but some kind of like, you've probably seen presentations where they have like different colored dots, the bigger dot for the bigger subgroups. Stuff like that can be useful. I think that if it's just a listing of a given subgroup, it's probably not as useful. But like one of our schools, when they dug into the data and they really started looking at it, they realized that their math problem was boys doing math, not girls doing math. And so, the data can illustrate things that are against the stereotype, but visualization, I think, is a really important part.
Yeah.
And if you all talk about this, what I was going to suggest is that you keep on thinking that ultimately the goal of this project is to make recommendations to the nation and to new learners, essentially new schools, new districts, new states. And so be reflecting on what exactly would you recommend. If you were doing this over again, probably been in this for years and you got your feet wet and your hands dirty and you know all the challenges. So keep on reflecting on what are the lessons learned for you, and let's put together a kind of coherent framework of thoughts from that. I mean, I thought Elaine's ideas right now are just right on. So I think everybody else's are too, but think about how we turn your observations into a framework.
I think one thing I would add is I think it's really important to think about the user, or kind of like the role, and like I don't think you can necessarily say lists are good or lists are bad. And when I think about the folks at the school sites who are actually providing interventions to students, I think that they definitely need the list, and they're going through all kinds of hoops to create those lists themselves currently, and so I think I think that we can do things to streamline that process for them and make it more efficient. But I also agree that if you're talking about even like a principal of a large school or in a district, that the lists are just less helpful because they're working at kind of just different levels. So I think when we're thinking about like best practices, I think it's just really important to identify kind of like the role or the goal for who this best practice applies to.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to also bleed over into the intervention group. So if you're a principal, you're looking at the whole entire school. Like what Elaine was talking about, those bigger dots would be really helpful for identifying trends that are going on in the school, like she was saying with the math and the boys' performance in math. But if you're a teacher, I know like I've heard some schools that are working specifically with their teachers that they do need the list. They want to see those individual students. They're not as interested in the bigger picture. So I think you're right on, David, with what you're saying about different users are going to have a little bit different need, and especially with the visualization of it. Are there any other thoughts?
This is Joyce Romano. I thought, too, I reviewed the Wisconsin dues that Jared was talking about, and I thought the subset that had the questions was also very helpful. For each category, there was a list of questions to be asked to consider and reflect on the scores, and again, leading to what could be done, what was actionable. But that seemed very useful as well.
Yeah, I do like.
Oh, go ahead.
You can go ahead.
I was just going to say towards Joanne's question, you know, what would I do different if I had a magic wand? This really comes out of my Perkins experience more than my EWS experience. But having nationally specified categories, I think eliminates a certain amount of intuition that would be better placed in the school or the district's hands. And I'm thinking in particular, you know, in my population, I have to report African Americans, which is less than 1%, but I don't have a way of differentiating between Navajo and Pueblo tribes. And I have schools where that differentiation is way more important, and they might have one African American kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I had a magic wand, I would like to be able to give my districts a little more flexibility in the demographic groupings that they look at.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I agree with you a lot. And I think both that and what Joyce was saying kind of with the questions for action with the Wisconsin report, I think that both of those kind of lead to this, you know, it's not just about identifying the kids, it's also about providing the right support for the kids, right? So how do we make that actionable? You know, in New Mexico where there's more different tribes, then there might be culturally different interventions. But we always need to be thinking about kind of what do we do with this data after we have it, right? So I think some of that is in the other groups, and Joanna, I'd love, if you guys have already been talking about some of that, feel free to jump in, because I think that these two pieces are very intertwined. In order for it to be actionable, we have to have a report that provides that information in the right way.
Well, I think it's a very interesting point that brings us back to the idea that data systems are great and we need to be able to customize them to the individual needs, as it were, of states in this case, or districts, and then in order to get to the student level.
Yeah. I do want to pull up, I like the slides from Diplomas Now, because there's an example at the very end of this one where they incorporate both success highways, and it's kind of getting into the socio-emotional side of adding those kind of indicators in there. And I was wondering what people's thoughts are on if you had something like what's on the screen right now. So over on the left-hand side, you have resiliencies, relationships, learning and social interests, strengths and difficulties. And then on the right-hand side, you have more of your traditional ABCs, your attendance, your behavior, and course performance. Are there any reflections on something that kind of combines these different indicators? I think part of my question is also, is this too much data? How do you kind of, or is this enough data? Does this give enough context? If you were working with a district, would this be helpful, do you think, or do you think that what are your thoughts?
Well, Sarah, this project's about college readiness, right?
Mm-hmm. It's about, isn't it about both too? Graduation and college?
It's about both, but it's about expanding the idea of the ABCs which have been sort of what Johns Hopkins has hung its hat on, into what is college readiness for persistence for 2 years, college and career, actually. And we still shortchanged the career discussion, in my view. So it's getting ready, kids ready for success as young adults and older adults later. So it is, and I know that we at Hopkins, you know, have a struggle. We keep on having to remind ourselves, nope, we're not talking about what we talked about last year. We're talking about adventuring into a new world. That's the way to put it.
Right, so that's why I asked that question, because I'm wondering, like, then what are the data elements we want to pay attention to that are predictive of college readiness? And maybe that's the whole point of the project, but it just seems this level of detail that you're showing us is really more like, you know, school success, K-12 success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that.
Here, okay, sorry, Sarah.
Oh, that's right. Well, I was just going to say that I think the data elements are going to be the indicators, basically, right? So what indicators are we finding that are predictive of college readiness and college success, college preparation? So that's kind of in the other group that Joanna's leading, and I love that that we're getting some cross-pollination between the different groups. But as far as like whether you're in the K-12 setting or you're in the college setting, if you're going to be looking at a report like this that's on the screen right now, for example, is this helpful or is this too much information, or how do you, I guess, how do you figure out what to do with all of these different students by looking at this kind of a display?
Yeah, so that's why I was asking, because maybe, so you're saying, like if we pretended that the actual variables on this screen were ones that we had agreed to because the other group developed them, what would that, yeah, okay, yeah. I think it's I think there's a lot of information here. It's like almost too overwhelming for me to think about. As a, if I was an advisor, for example, and this was a display of, you know, I would want some broader categories. You know, like, for example, the work that I'm doing with my own K-12 districts, I have 2 that I serve, is getting more of their guidance counselors to actually develop college, you know, educational plans, like post-high school plans with each of the students, and to actually, you know, document those, create them in a database. So that would be, for example, like, does the student have a plan? So then you know, okay, here's the 10 that don't. Oh, let me call them in. They need a plan. So that kind of stuff is more actionable. I might be thinking of it too simply. I'm sorry if I'm bringing the conversation too concrete.
No, I think that's fine. I think that does get into a question that's out there a lot is, what are like check boxes that we need to know as a counselor, you know, like Joanna was saying earlier with the PE credits, you know, even though that's not, you know, necessarily what we all think about with graduating high school, it is a requirement that they have 1 PE credit usually. So we do need to know that if that student has that credit or not. But I don't know if that's necessarily in this kind of broader sense of an indicator to, I don't know. This is a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the indicator maybe is, are they on track to finishing high school? You know, the details of PE and do they have 4 Englishes and all that other stuff is underneath that. But if you're just looking at the purest of a college readiness, are they on track to finishing high school?
Yeah.
Do they have an educational, you know, and like I said, I know we're not the committee creating the indicators, but I'm just thinking that I think when that committee does finish its work, the subset of indicators are probably going to be like half a dozen, or not more than half a dozen.
And those would definitely change. But
what I was going to say is that Bob Valfance and I have kind of put together a short, I don't know, 2-pager, I think, right now, somewhat synthesizing what the other 2 work groups have done. And need to say up front that we don't yet have your thoughts. And however, we're going to try and polish it a little bit more based on the conversations I had yesterday with the two other work groups. And we'll probably circulate them. So I hope you look for that. If we want, it will tell you a little bit more about where the other guys are going. And I think you will see the opportunities for jumping in from the data visualization and just generally data systems perspective. That's number one. Number two is that we've also at Hopkins been developing a resource database. It now has, 220 entries. That's kind of neat, coded in various ways, and I sure hope we can add in the data visualization, all the things you've just contributed. But that's kind of the second piece of the emerging picture, I would say. And we're going to circulate that. And again, both of these things are internal documents. We want your opinion. We don't want them disseminated yet. So that's where we are. But I think we're now at the stage where we need to pull together the three work groups. And I also wanted to remind you that the week of November 14th, we're having day-long face-to-face meetings in November. And I hope you put those on your calendar. Yeah. So.
Yes.
Sarah?
So yes.
Hi, this is Chris Mazzio. I just want to say one thing and follow up to Joyce's and Joanna's comments, which is, I think Joanna alluded to this, the kind of the way the work group's product will work together becomes important, because as Joyce kind of suggested, I think the data work group, the indicator work group rather, will probably identify, based on particular uses, a set of kind of power indicators that are kind of meet the principles of good indicators. But since the uses are different, some of them are for graduation, some for college readiness, some maybe for college success, they probably will be overlapping but not exactly the same. So I think similarly, we'll have to think about how those principles embody kind of good design and good displays, and then thinking about, are there different visualization principles or data infrastructure principles perhaps for different uses, or is it more simply choose your indicators and use these kind of universal design and infrastructure principles? I don't think we know the answer to that yet, but I feel like that's making me think that the work across the groups is working together is very important. There's a lot of synergy and overlap, and we need to align our efforts well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, this is Julia in Phoenix with the United Way work that we were doing here locally and across different communities nationally. One observation to this in a lessons learned kind of opportunity was really along those kind of that same vein of working with each other from the support and the indicator work groups integrated with the data system. But it's really about what we learned and what we navigated through was also the use and the making sure that, and I think that this belongs here in this data systems. I haven't attended the other work group conversations, but really that professional development piece, the practicality of using the data system. So I completely agree with looking at the different roles and know that that's a big conversation. What do we need to display for the different functions on campus and those accessing this data, but also making sure to carve out, and what does it look like to carve out not just the professional development, but the day-to-day use by role and holistically as well. Because the data system, we had some experience where the data system was wonderful, it was operational, and nobody was using it because we didn't carve out that time. We didn't build that into the original plans of it, or we weren't ahead of it enough. And so just from a lessons learned perspective, I'd be curious to hear other people's experience with that who are further down the road of implementation. And I think that it's part of this conversation as we're talking about the data. It's also the use of it and making sure that everyone is on the same page and benefiting from it.
Great point.
Yes, I wonder, Jared, do you have any insights from the districts that you worked with? Did they, like, I like how you provided the guiding questions kind of at the beginning of the document to try to, you know, really make people think about that piece of first. Did you have feedback from districts? Did they actually carve out time, or was that something that you guys provided as a state? Is Jared still on? He might have had to leave. Anybody else want to comment on?
Oh, I'm here now. I was stuck on mute. Sorry.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah, I was just going to try to jump in, actually, and say that that's such an important point, that when we started designing our system, well, first I did the statistic part, but then before we did anything else, we went out to schools and talked to them and said, how does this make sense to you? How do you use this? What do you use? What is important? And we used that before we ever met with any developers or our IT people about building the system. We had a list of things that were important to the end users and the things that they wanted. And we didn't get all the things that they wanted because of constraints, but we were able to say, like, Jared may think that it's really important that we have some kind of graph, but what the user said was really important was, well, we want this list that's sortable, and that's like the #1 priority for us. Now, we only talked to about 40 districts out of 420, and we tried to get a good cross-section of size, but we were cognizant that the districts that talked to us were districts that were probably higher functioning in terms of their use of data and their interest in this kind of tool. And so we actually partnered with REL Midwest 2 years later to do sort of a survey of our principals that was not that was random, so that we could get feedback from users who maybe weren't that interested in the early warning system and find out why they weren't that interested. So we always had this user focus in mind. And the challenge is that what we learned, which I left before we started making decisions to try to get around this, is different users have completely different goals that they want out of the system, and different pieces of information are more important to different users. And so what is totally intuitive and optimally designed for one user is really frustrating and hard to use for another user, and both of those users are people we want to use the system. And yeah, so I think that we designed it for people who would adopt it and be evangelists about it, which I think was a smart decision at the start, so that word of mouth took off and people were aware of the system. But then new people who got brought on board, I think, found the system less useful and less meeting their specific needs because it wasn't designed with them in mind in the first place.
Gotcha. Can you give some examples of?
Oh, go ahead.
Can you yeah, I was just wondering if you could give an example of like something that one user really wanted and another user found very frustrating.
So one thing that I think is really important, and I was thinking about this too when looking at what we're looking at, is that I really think that the system had to be hierarchical to help users, because some people don't care how the student is flagged, because they're just going to say, okay, these are 3 students I know who are at severe risk. I actually don't care what the data says. I'm going to just go talk to those 3 students or their parents or their sibling or whatever, and I don't need all this extra information. It's just clouding my decision-making process. And I also think people, they would say, like, people will get hung up on, oh, well, it's assessment, so we need to do an assessment intervention, and that's not really true. I would agree with them that that's not true. The reason they're doing bad on assessments could be that they hate taking tests. It could be that they are, you know, not challenged. There's many, many reasons, and so they didn't want that extra information. And then there were other people who found that the system didn't provide enough information, and so they thought, well, I know that our attendance data isn't as accurate as I would like it to be, so I really want to know when and where that attendance data came from before I trust whether or not that flag is correct. And that's also a really valid response, but it's not a response a teacher would have to the data. It's a response that a school administrator or a district administrator, someone in the district office would have. But both are valid. It's just that they would require different levels of depth in displaying the data so that they could both get the answers they wanted.
Yep. I've actually heard very similar things around here, so that's a really good point. Any other thoughts on that from everyone? Okay. So I'm going to kind of recap what I've heard so far, and then I'd love for you guys to chime in. Basically what I'm hearing, or what I've taken notes on so far, is that you know, these systems can't be cost prohibitive, that it is desirable to be able to sort students, that we definitely want some framing around how to make the reports actionable, that visualization is going to be very important, and that's going to differ a little bit for different users, for the different lenses that Joanna was talking about, like the student level, the setting level, and the system level, and that too many indicators might make it too confusing. But then based on what Jared was just saying, some end users might want that as well. Is there more that you guys think should be included, or other thoughts? What's missing?
Another point I thought was said, this Joyce, Sarah, was the idea of having, I guess it was like some flexibility in terms of defining the sorting groups. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but the example about African American versus Native American, where you really need to say different tribes within Native American. So some flexibility to allow for those regional differences.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was a interesting discussion, because we ran into this issue about different tribes in different regions of Wisconsin as well. And one of the things that was a lot of districts' question is, and I don't have an answer on this, but I do think it's more of an open question than I had thought, is well, what is the use of dividing by demographic groups for planning interventions when you can't really intervene on some demographics? And some districts felt like, well, we actually do really want to know so we can decide whether we need some sort of cultural intervention at the school level. And other districts felt like that was setting expectations or reifying stereotypes about different groups of subgroups of students by telling school staff that, say, that Hispanic boys have higher discipline referrals than other students. And so then the school would sort of adopt this culture of, well, maybe we have a problem with misbehaving Hispanic boys, and that could be really detrimental for the staff to have that way of thinking. So I don't have the answer, but I found that challenge was really, districts had thought a lot about that and had come to very different conclusions about how they thought to address this issue of the role demographics may or may not play in these data indicators. And to me, that question is really interesting, and it's really important to, and I don't know if there's going to be a one-size-fits-all answer, and I certainly wouldn't be the person to suggest that I could give it, but I think that the debate is very important to have, and I was pretty proud of schools for how well they had thought that through relative to myself and even to some of us at the state level. We thought, oh, wow, We hadn't thought about it that way before because we're usually focused on reporting, and they're focused on linking the data to interventions, and those two different uses have different implications for demographic information, I think.
I think that's an excellent thing to bring up, Jared, because I was working with Puget Sound up in Washington with the ESD up there, and they were talking also about how, you know, in one of their districts, they have 90% of their student population is different ethnicities and different backgrounds, but their staff is primarily white Caucasian teachers and administrators. And so there was a huge concern around, well, if we break this out by different races, then that makes it gives them fuel for the fire for judging and some of these groups of students. But on the other hand, so I hear that argument, but then on the other hand, I also know that in Montana, for example, some of the districts that are using these early warning systems are going out into the community, talking to the different tribal leaders and trying to develop interventions with the tribal leaders. And I know that there's another example of like trying to include members from the churches and just trying to talk a little bit more about what can the community do, how can we talk to parents and really get to the parents about the importance of attendance, for example. In some cultures that they might not, especially if it's a second generation or first generation family over from a different culture that doesn't put a lot of importance on attendance, like some of the Pacific Islander communities. So I totally see both ways, and I don't know how to answer that question either.
I think you just answered it pretty well. I mean, if you're gonna tie it to a strategy, then it seems, yeah, like what you described seems totally reasonable. And I think maybe, you know, the guiding questions that we had in our action guide in Wisconsin, maybe we should have had a section that was like, well, if you are going to look at demographics, are you using a strategy that is meant to deal with truly with cultural issues that may be causing these problems, or you may be able to affect change it? Are you ready as a school to do that? Because if you are, great, but I would guess a lot of schools aren't, and so if they're not, then this is more of a risk than it is a benefit. But that's how, what you just described, those all sound like really positive uses of that information. And that would be great examples for, if you're going to provide the information, you should give schools the ideas of, or these suggestions for interventions that they can do that actually will address the root of that problem.
Yeah, this is David. I feel pretty strongly that demographic data is important to include and to be real about how we're serving our students. I think nationally we have a system that does have primarily white, you know, upper middle class educators, and more serving students of colors and serving communities that they don't necessarily come from. I think when, like, we've looked at that data and we said, oh yeah, like we noticed that we're suspending African American males at a higher rate. I think I would hope that, like, the takeaway from that is not like, oh, it's these African American boys. Like, it's actually that we as a system and like we as a group of adults are not serving this population of students, and so we need to reflect on our practices and, quite honestly, our biases, right? Because we know that implicit bias is real, and that's something that impacts assessment of performance, right? And so, yeah, I think for us, like, having that demographic data has been hugely important, and like we actually have moved. You know, we've like created organizational goals around creating, you know, eliminating disproportionality in the student outcomes that we see, and I think naming them and being able to track progress towards them is, you know, like that's the only way that we're going to change, right, these inequities.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
This is Joanna. I wanted to jump in and just say in this two-pager that I think now is going to be 3 pages that we're going to circulate to you in the next probably week. We have a section which we call modulators, and that is effectively addressing what you have just been all beautifully discussing. which is the cultural context of data. And what can we change, what can't we change? And so I hope you'll just really hone in on that section when you see it. So that's the way to say it. Think about it. I mean, what we're thinking is that there are things you put into place that well, I'll just leave it at that. And you'll see the definitions and we'll go from there. But I do hope you'll pay attention to it and give us your thoughts, much more importantly than paying attention.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. And just to kind of go off of what David was just saying, I think that, like, as researchers and all of us are here, we assume positive intent, that all teachers are going to have this positive intent, and that it could be a tool to actually address some of those implicit biases that people have, and that we could use it for, you know, to look at discipline disparities and try to come up with a strategy of how do we actually address this. But then I also think about what Jared was just saying and how, you know, some schools might be ready for that and some schools might not be ready for it. And to be very clear, as we are putting this out there, that some of these data displays in the wrong hands could be used negatively, and that we should probably address that out front, possibly, as well. Kind of the thought that I'm having right now. So are there any other thoughts kind of going off of that?
Sarah, this is Joyce again. As you were listing the summary of what we talked about, a few minutes ago, I can't remember, somebody talked about principles of good design and principles of good displays. And I don't know if they were referencing, like, is that a known, is there a known list of what those principles are that's in the, you know, data display world? I think somehow we should, you know, flesh those out. I don't know if the comment was that those are known or not known or should be known, but to me that would be part of it too. I don't know what the list is, but I guess there probably is a list. Yeah? Is that something you recognize?
If somebody else wants to jump in, that's totally fine. I know that I think that there are principles of good design that, like, graphic designers and people like that would know. Mm-hmm. But as far as, like, specifically on how to report indicators, I'm not sure. But as far, I don't know, like, whoever was talking about the bubbles and having bigger dots for, like, students more at risk, I think that some of that would come out in some of those design principles, which kind of makes me wonder if we have any designers on our team, actually.
We did. We had a number, and some of them, it's a funny situation that they're also, you know, paid developers, so it balances back and forth. But what I wanted to just add in to Joyce's wonderful comments was that in many ways, you as a group of practitioners are the people who are going to form that list. There isn't one currently. And there isn't a list of what works best with different audiences. And so your experiences and recommendations are what is extremely valuable.
The two, I think, authors that come to my mind in terms of articulating a kind of like general set of design principles for data displays are Leland Wilkinson, who wrote The Grammar of Graphics, and that, you know, there's like, I don't know if for people who use R, ggplot2 is kind of built on that. But I think that you know, he basically is trying to take visuals and apply a set of grammatical rules to them. So that was useful. And then also Edward Tufte TUFTE has a lot of done a lot of like work around just design and kind of like creating novel design and information display.
Super. So I think we may have some of those references in the kind of resource for developing, but if you would like to send those in additional, that would be super.
This is Chris. I actually made the comment before. I think there is a pretty robust, as kind of David just suggested, literature that cuts across the field. So I think this group can probably come to that issue at some point in its lifespan, and probably when we do, probably want to summarize for folks what we know, what is out there from the literature, summarize what people who do this work on the ground, they have a design orientation or experience, think about. So, for example, we work pretty closely with a firm, nonprofit, that does a lot of visualization work and has, I think, a real keen design sense. So I think this group, when it gets to the end of kind of the product it produces, kind of needs to kind of come to some sort of understanding about what those design principles are, and they have to both embody what we know from the literature and the experiences of all fields, but particularly what kind of people on the ground who've done these systems at all levels know and have experienced. If there's any research, I don't think there's a lot of research per se on the relationship between visualization and use or anything, but if there is, we have to find it and speak to that larger issue. So I think that's an important issue for this group and maybe some adjunct members to grapple with at some point in our lifespan.
Yeah, that makes me wonder actually about, kind of after we have our list of this is what we definitely think that we want to see, I like Jared's idea about running it through some end users to make sure that whatever we're putting together actually makes sense to the people who would be using it. And so maybe that's further down the road too, working with a designer at that point also of trying to incorporate in the end user's experience with what us from the research and practitioner sides are saying is important.
Have you all done any research on how much is digestible? I think it might be worth, I don't know if there's literature out there already, but I can tell you that just anecdotally, when we kind of narrow the focus to the ABCs and we give them this really clear message, don't worry about the rest, this is enough, teachers really respond to that. And so one thing I would just say is worth thinking about is that whatever kind of specs we might put out, yes, the end users, but maybe in a real research-based way. It seems like the balance is always between more data and people checking out.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can kind of hear you.
Okay, this is Francis in my time with Evansville and Vanderbilt School Corporation, and I think that kind of humorous in that we initially started out with just the ABC indicators, and then we did some more focus groups with a number of principals, and so they said, well, can you add various assessments, and then can you track our suspension as well as
Francis?
suspension on previous programs. But now I think we're at a point where there's a lot going on with that report. So, we kind of come full circle with it. And so, trying to really think about, well, do we really want all that on there? Now I'm starting to, listen to our conversation and think through that again. So I just wanted to question that.
I'm afraid I missed a lot of that. Do you want to be able to, could you type it in the chat possibly? That way, I think,
sure, I
really want to hear what you're saying.
I'm having real technical difficulties today. So, but yeah, I can type it in the chat.
Okay. And then I can read it out loud once you get it up there, because I definitely want to get your voice in here. While Francis is typing up that, are there any other comments about it? Because I do want to ask one more question to everybody, and that's kind of around, after looking at all these different examples that are out there, is there anything that you saw that you're definitely thinking, if only we had this, is there any pieces that are missing?
This is Jared. I think that in general, a big piece that's often missing is helping schools or end users have the context around the metrics. I don't know if everyone else thinks this way, but I mean, I think the purpose of a metric is to summarize several data elements into fewer data elements and put them on a scale that the user can interpret. And then when the user interprets it, they need to have context, and the Wisconsin system doesn't do this very well either. I don't think we ever came up with a good solution, but a metric you need to be able to understand as a user how to feel about a metric when you see a number. Like when you change speed limits from miles per hour to kilometers per hour, you can tell someone, oh, you're doing 130, and they don't, if they grew up in the imperial system, they don't know whether 130 is scary or boring or anything, and that is what's missing when you create a metric. I think end users get a little disoriented because they don't know, and I think we try to use colors to show that, but users don't know where the colors come from often, and so we tried a lot of different things in Wisconsin, and I don't know if there's a true answer, but thinking more seriously about the context that the metric is presented within as a way to figure out what emotional content should be sparked by the end user, and whether that's like giving them a sense that this student is in the bottom 10% of some group, or this student is 3 times better than the average on this metric, or something, and how we communicate that and what are useful contextual measures, I think is really important when you go from concrete data elements like attendance to abstract data elements like progress on attendance or nominal attendance or things like that.
Yeah, so having some kind of comparison. I wonder if so Eric Meredith's system gives the propensity scores, or it's not propensity scores, but it gives a value basically of the larger the value is, the more off track you are. So there is kind of a comparison built in there, and it's not just color coded. So I'm wondering if maybe something like that could be even incorporated.
We did that in Wisconsin, but the scale is really important then, because educators live on the grading scale of the United States where, like, I don't know what an F is anymore, but 65% is an F or something. And so if you present things in a 0 to 100, you're kind of running up against this A, B, C, D logic that's like ingrained in educators, and you have to think about how does the proportion of students in each category then line up with that, or can you help your users be separated and not think about it in the A, B, C, D, F? So I do think like continuous measures are really useful, and we used one in Wisconsin. But what I found is I don't think we'd been as thoughtful as we could about giving educators the tools to understand how much more worried about a 25 should I be than about a 75. Should it be twice as much or 200 times as much worried? And figuring that out, I think it could be really powerful and helpful in designing metrics for different users.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read Francis's chat, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up a little bit. So Francis just said that they started with only the ABCs and did a focus group with principals. They wanted assessment data and suspensions, alternative data, and they've added this, but it may be too much now. And so she says that she feels like they might be coming full circle with this. So again, thinking about that balance of how much is too much, how much is not enough. I do want to go ahead and take us over here to just kind of in closing. We are planning to do these meetings about every 4 to 6 weeks, so expect a doodle poll from me with a few dates for the end of August maybe. We do want to prepare all of this kind of documentation and have something to go over in the November meeting that Joanna had mentioned. So that last bullet on the screen right now, it says, reminder, just mark your calendars for the face-to-face meeting in Washington, or in Baltimore for the week of November 14th. I also want to remind people that if you have sample MOUs related to data sharing, that we'd love it if you could send those in. We would make them so that they aren't identifiable or anything like that, but we are trying to look at different examples of MOUs and how you share that data. It might be very interesting to actually have that, to see an example of the MOU with PowerSchool, or if you guys had to do a MOU at all in New Mexico. And then I don't think we're here yet, but I think at some point we might come to a point where it would make more sense for us to have smaller working groups. Right now I feel like we're a pretty good size because we're only having about, 11 people on each call. But if we do want to get a little bit more in depth on some of this, it might be easier to break up into smaller groups. Then the last thing that I wanted to say is that what I'm going to do from here is type up what we've been talking about. I'm going to send that out to the whole entire group to kind of get your opinions. You can use that document then to respond and let me know if there's anything that I missed in the conversation. That will also give people a chance who weren't able to make this call a chance to get their voice in. And next time, what I'd really like to talk about and be thinking about over the next 4 weeks is to think about what are the technical pieces that schools and districts would need. What are some of those barriers and challenges? We heard a little bit about systems being possibly cost prohibitive, but what does that really mean? And so I'll send out some questions for you to be thinking about, and that's probably what we'll be talking about in our next meeting. Are there any other things that we should, that you want to say before we close off? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time today. I think this was a really productive conversation, and I will be sending out the notes soon.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Oh, not a problem. Bye-bye.